It is Monday, May 20th, 2019. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. And it was very educational. Get your ass kicked at Jiu-Jitsu Monday. We covered a really interesting movement, and unfortunately I missed the setup for it. But the like where it originally started, as far as I can remember, is when somebody has a underhook on you, or you have an underhook on somebody else rather, and they have that overhook or rather a whizzer on you, and you throw it away and then come back to their back, and it's kind of like a back take position from there, and we bump them down to the side and then take the arm. And for some stupid reason, I kept doing it wrong, though. You have to turn a certain way and bring your leg over to free their arm up and get them in a Kimura. Well, I kept doing it the wrong way, but the way I was doing it, I was putting my leg over the other way and getting an arm bar. And a pretty fucking mean arm bar, too, because, I went through it with my partner a few times where I was putting my pressure directly on top of him to get that arm around to a Kimura position. Because the first transition or I don't know, first version of this that we covered was just to a Kimura, and it was a pretty mean Kimura. But I noticed when I did it that I really liked keeping my weight really on top of my opponent. Keeping up on my toes, not on my knees or, leaning down on my hip or anything like that. But really getting up on my toes, staying up on my toes, and using the position, because you reach under and grab the outside of their left hand with your left hand, bring it to their body, and then you take your arm from the other side and you double up on that arm. Well, I found that if I just leaned a little bit further, like I was going for the arm break right there, I could down my opponent to where he was on his shoulder and his head. And from there, if I just did the step as it was required by the instructor, I would get the arm up and turn my opponent up on their side. And then that would make it possible to sink in that Kimura. But see, I was doing it from there, and you step over the head, to get that Kimura in. And I was thinking to myself, it's like if I just take my leg from where it currently is, and get on the hip, and then take my leg and get it on their hip, on their right hip, I could pull the arm away far enough to throw it into an arm bar. Just guide the leg up under the arm as I'm coming around and transitioning into that armbar position, and then hooking the wrist and extending. And as a matter of fact, that's what I did a couple of times, because it seems so automatic. It's like, oh man, it's right there. I could just put my foot up on the hip and push it off, and it's there, armbar all day long. So that's more or less what I trained. I wish the instructor would have corrected me on it. But then again, at the same time, I'm kind of happy that I did it that way, because it was like, yeah, that's a really high pressure position to be in, especially if you're trying to transition into a Kimura or, again, an armbar position. As far as sparring goes, I got my ass handed to me today, man. It's like one of those days that made me doubt my fucking jiu-jitsu. It's like, why am I even here, man? But it was a Monday, so, and unfortunately I didn't get in on the 6 a.m. class, and I find that's really intrinsic to starting my week off right. But I think that I can still make it through the rest of the week and get a better week out of it. But just the same, I really felt kind of weak out there today, man. I mean, the opponent that I was going against is very good, and so he was putting a little additional pressure today on, and I certainly felt it. Although I don't think he actually got me to a submission per se. We did stall out a couple of times where, I couldn't really move from where I was without giving up something that would have put him in a better position, and he couldn't give up any of the pressure he was putting on me, or I would have been able to get into a better position. So I just said, hey man, this is kind of a standoff here, so let's go ahead and reposition and start again. And that's exactly what we did, or standstill rather. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw down into some music. As far as subject matter, again, I got a ton of tabs in my browser. I think we got a little bit to go on. If not, I'm sure I can find something. The Twitter sphere is always full of stuff about crypto. And as far as our first dance goes, I think this one's appropriate. Body count. Talk shit, get shot. Here on Coin Metal. First dance. And that was Prong with Divide and Conquer. And if you happen to be lucky enough to be in one of the towns that they're going to be touring in, you might get an opportunity to see that one live. And let me tell you, they put on a great show. I saw some pictures from the show that they did up here in Portland, and also some video from what they did up in Seattle. And man, I miss it. I missed it. It's terrible. I mean, if there were one thing to cry about, it'd be that I didn't get the opportunity to see Prong when they came to town. Of course, it would help if they actually came to a town that was within 100 miles of my house. So that would be a bonus. But, until Eugene decides to invite them, I don't see that happening. Anyway, as far as what we're going to cover today, I caught this article a couple times on my Twitter feed, and I kind of wanted to ignore it, but at the same time I didn't, only because I wanted to address it because of the title, and I wanted to ignore it specifically because of the title, only because it seems like an off-putting subject matter, or at least to me, because there's always been like this various attempts, rather. I was going to say but no, there have been multiple attempts to redefine exactly what Bitcoin is and what it's meant for and what it's supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. And because of that, when I see a title like this, I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, this is somebody trying to backtrack the history of Bitcoin and correct something to fit their alignment with reality, not necessarily the reality, but a reality, and to drive a specific point. I don't know. Anyway, so this is on medium.com, the difference between general and specific consensus in Bitcoin. And this is by Justin Piercy, authored May 18th. And it's a bit of a read. We're probably going to be on it for a little while. But nonetheless, we are going to do it, because I was reading this earlier, and it definitely seemed tasty enough for a live read. So here it is. Let's see. Quote, nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. Consensus has to be one of the most popular buzzwords of the last few years within the blockchain industry. Almost everyone has seen this term used or have been bombarded with phrases like, quote, consensus protocol or distributed consensus, or as bold as consensus conference. The irony is, most people truly don't understand what it means, or often misuse the word when speaking of their projects or source code. Definition of consensus. 1A. General agreement. Unanimity. B. The judgment arrived at by most of those concerned. 2. Group solidarity in sentiment and belief. The simple definition is general agreement. This is not the same as total agreement, nor predetermined agreement, as some might think. There has to be some level of decision-making process that includes 5 requirements for a true consensus to take place: inclusion, participation, cooperation, egalitarianism, solution-mindedness. That was number 3. Number 4 is consensus decision-making involves a collaborative discussion rather than an adversarial debate. The first peer-to-peer global consensus protocol. Little-known facts in history reveal a primitive attempt to launch a global peer-to-peer information network in the early 1930s. Quote, he hoped to find a prototypical defensive weapon in the interest of world peace, but his appeals to J.P. Morgan Jr. and British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain went nowhere. Quote, it was the height of World War II, and Tesla had claimed to have invented a powerful particle beam weapon known as the death ray that could have proved invaluable in the ongoing conflict. This pivotal moment in Dr. Nikola Tesla's career was a brutal awakening and learning process to why it's important not to depend on single sources for funding or support. And it seems like my program might have hung up here. Yeah, bastages. Anyway, we'll go ahead and reboot that bad boy and get it started up again. And just a pause here a moment. Connected. There we go. Alright. And so, as I was saying, I'm going to get a knockoff of this one. This is a quote from some book, I guess. He hoped to find a prototypical defensive weapon in the interest of world peace, but his appeals to J.P. Morgan Jr. and British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain went nowhere. Quote, it was the height of World War II, and Tesla had claimed to have invented a powerful particle beam weapon known as the death ray that could have proved invaluable in the ongoing conflict. I wanted to make a minor adjustment on this. This pivotal moment in Dr. Nikola Tesla's career was a brutal awakening and learning process to why it's important not to depend on single sources for funding or support. He quickly realized that a global marketing effort must be done to secure funding as well as to ensure global peace. He implemented his consensus mechanism by sending an investment prospectus with limited versions of its death ray blueprints to the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia. Not one single entity could reproduce his device without cooperating among themselves and with him. Quote, he said that there was no danger that his invention could be stolen, for he had at no time committed any part of it to paper. The blueprint for the Teleforce weapon was all in his mind. Dr. Nikola Tesla's decentralized information scheme was never fully adopted, but proved effective when in 1935 the Soviet Union agreed to pay him for more detailed plans, specifications, and complete information by negotiating through the U.S. Amtor Trading Corporation, simultaneously ensuring the United States and the Soviet Union would never enter into an arms race with one another during the construction process or at any time after completion. Their military capabilities would be equal and identical, and war would be pointless. Consensus on the Bitcoin consensus. What most people fail to understand, the consensus mechanism described in the Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto was referring to the use of proof of work to ensure that all peers on the network and their operators adhere to strict conditions for network decisions among themselves. This is not the same as conferences or chat forums where developers talk and agree upon similar technologies or implementations, nor does it refer to the use of static or specific variables within the code. While all nodes run the same version, what this refers to in the Bitcoin white paper is selectively choosing the proper blockchain to be considered the most valid. Quote, expressing their acceptance of valid blocks by working on extending them, and rejecting invalid blocks by refusing to work on them. Satoshi's consensus. Quote, consensus decision-making is a group decision-making process in which group members develop and agree to support a decision in the best interests of the whole group or common goal. Consensus may be defined professionally as an acceptable resolution, one that can be supported even if not, quote, the favorite of each individual. It has its origin in the Latin word consensus, agreement, which is from consentio, meaning literally feel together. The consensus mechanism Satoshi mentioned was never fully explained in detail through the white paper or online forum chats. After careful study of all core source code versions 9 and prior, it becomes clear that the vast amounts of functions and their outputs determine the outcome of the wallet software and is later recorded on the blockchain as historical evidence. The wallet software does not start executing code from number 1 sequentially to line 10,000 plus, ensuring all local variables are in agreement with those from other nodes. Source code is separated into specific files containing functions and classes referenced as objects with variables contained. These are created, cloned, and destroyed in real time via random access memory, modified and executed when called upon by other functions. The core of the software requires that all functions work and cooperate together to achieve a common means to the same end. The path of execution is not static. It does not remain constant. Function output is influenced by already loaded objects, their states or environmental variables on the network, and even past calculations on the blockchain itself. How does Bitcoin resist censorship and fraud? Quote, one of the primary reasons why I created Bitcoin was to make a system that could act without needing regulatory control over the base money supply and still retain a level of resistance to fraud. And that's by Craig S. Wright. Contrary to Mr. Wright's claim that he created Bitcoin to replace regulatory control over the base money supply, this experimental network protocol was created to explore the, quote, crazy concept that computer source code running on a decentralized, distributed network of peer nodes could in fact enforce regulatory control over the base money supply without human intervention or a centralized digital authority. This was a revolutionary concept that had never been tried in the past before. Consensus through peers does not replace the need for laws and regulations to be implemented and followed or adhered to by its users or participants. It was never designed to ensure all other network users are protected under all use cases. It was never intended to be used to circumvent already existing financial laws. It was never intended to replace the internet as we know and use it today. The Bitcoin network itself does not minimize crime and was never designed to do this. Mr. Wright proliferates everywhere that he created a decentralized monetary system to ensure criminal activities are traced and prosecuted. But almost everyone who truly understands blockchain technologies and the origins of Bitcoin unanimously agree it was to prevent hyperinflation and monetary policy manipulation from central banks or corrupt regulators and governments. Satoshi made this motive self-evident to anyone reading the text embedded within the first block, number 0. Quote, The Times, 3rd January 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. Bitcoin was launched during a time of global civil unrest, explosive distrust in Wall Street, well earned by the way, and the Federal Reserve, along with governments with ties to the banking sector, which is pretty much everyone. This was a chaotic time in humanity's history, shortly after the real estate derivatives bubble crash of 2008 and demise of the E-Gold and Liberty Reserve and similar centralized digital payment processors. Along with an escalating collapse of global fiat currencies, economists, entrepreneurs, and average users were seeking for a system that could be implemented quickly on a global scale to ensure all untrusted parties using it would need to follow the guidelines set forth upon inception and could not alter the rules on a whim for their benefit. Yes, all transactions are transparent, but they're pseudo-anonymous to protect privacy, not to prevent or encourage criminal activities. Using Bitcoin as a tool for law enforcement entrapment would be quite an ambiguous scheme and would never be considered a primary method for collecting evidence. Craig Wright did not invent Bitcoin. This is not opinion. It is a simple provable fact. By following the same consensus mechanism in the Bitcoin white paper and applying it to Craig's bold claims using his supplied evidence, if all other nodes on the network can't follow a tamper-proof method to verify work done, then it is considered invalid. You can mine all day and night to create a chain offline or write countless fictional articles of value. You can't reconnect and then attempt to forcefully replace existing work done on the global network that you were never part of to begin with. If nobody else can successfully verify the validity for the chain of evidence, it's rejected by all other nodes, and the most valid chain is used to build future blocks upon. That was Satoshi's original vision. Craig Wright and all of his supporters can keep their bullshit vision, and they claim to continue encouraging users to embed unfiltered web content directly on the blockchain through MetaNet. This was never part of the original Bitcoin and was never written in the white paper. Anyone who denies this obvious use case contradiction of a network intentionally separated from regular internet traffic are perpetrators of fraud or uneducated in all aspects of it. Yes, that includes the exchange services providing liquidity along with the media regurgitating lies without doing proper due diligence. Seek legal advice soon. Craig and Enchain have a history of working with the banks during the time he describes as between 2013 and mid-2014. What he wants the public to believe through his countless Medium posts is that he was working to involve the banking sector to support but not hinder Bitcoin mass adoption. This outlandish lie could not be further from the truth. Corrupt developers got paid to take Satoshi's consensus mechanism where not one single node can influence the network operations without agreement to where a single node can influence the entire network history all the way back to the past Genesis block as seen from technical analysis of the chain archive and IBD updates. Blockstream formed in 2014 by what some believe to be Bitcoin development contributions later turned out to be exposed as a central banking-backed investment firm, number 12. Whoa, I'm going to have to check that one. They ruthlessly hijacked future developments and forced many core developers to leave the project through harassment, slander, manipulation, or other questionable tactics. They went to work on altcoins. Bitcoin primarily uses a specific static consensus mechanism. Quote, according to Gavin Andreessen, checkpoints were originally introduced in response to an overflow bug which would permit anyone to spend anyone's bitcoins. Specific or static consensus that all nodes on the Bitcoin network must follow are clearly defined as constraints within the source code. Examples can be found in the file named consensus.h, located within the source code of newer Bitcoin versions. These variables used to be within other sections of the codebase in the past, but they remained constant. Block size limits, maximum transactions per block, block time spans, etc., are shared among all nodes on the network regardless of network conditions. Nodes can easily be confused to accept an invalid chain through simply because it has more proof of work compared to its fork counterpart. This is known as an unexpected chain hard fork. In the past, the process of selecting the most valid chain, ignoring the obvious exploited one, and rolling back to a mutually agreed checkpoint was done by developers, exchange services, block explorer operators, and merchants. A painstaking task of identifying the blockchain pivot point, invalidating unsuspected users' transactions long after they've been confirmed, was usually more damaging in terms of reputation than monetary losses incurred. Peers and node software compounded the attack vectors through exploited flaws in their wallet software that caused their Bitcoin wallet to crash or go offline due to resource exhaustion and get stuck on an invalid chain. Bitcoin Core 11 was a historical release. Blockstream developers, not Satoshi Nakamoto, integrated their attempts to automate and increase processing time, the blockchain reorganization process, after a normal chain fork/split. Node prioritization by exploitation of DNS seeds opens yet another attack vector. This update included an initial startup routine to connect and query a central server to receive a list of other peers and connect to in the future. Oh shit, what if they spoof that? DNS seeds, chain active, and initial block download were apparently designed to prevent nodes from getting stuck on invalid blocks, and to ensure that the chain with the most proof of work would always win in the race. In reality, they compromised the integrity of the wallet and consensus. Quote, "We sync from everyone we can, though limited to one during initial headers sync." Neglecting to verify the validity and consensus among all nodes on the network has opened new attack vectors that can easily be exploited if someone did manage to outpace honest miners or cause majority pools to go offline. Prioritizing a forked chain through header flooding can be done for all minimal investment and technical understanding. This is self-evident to all developers that attempt to use the Bitcoin codebase as is for their altcoin projects. They need to constantly ensure that they have the majority hash rate on the network. This is costly and wasteful, and in reality, just another centralized static consensus mechanism specific to certain conditions only. As of Core 18, Bitcoin still requires human supervision and intervention during times of non-consensus among the nodes regarding the blockchain state. Chain active and initial block download have changed the fundamentals for Bitcoin to maintain pure consensus. Looking into the source code further reveals the ability for an attacking chain to be broadcast to all nodes, forcefully rolling back blockchains from the current block 583.969 plus as many blocks as the attackers wish, all the way back to 533.59, known as the last static checkpoint. This is one reason Satoshi was concerned about checkpoints upon new releases, to minimize chain organization during hard forks and to prevent difficulty reaching consensus among all peers on the network. Satoshi never fully completed the source code reorganization process in early versions to securely automate and decide to mine blocks based on their validity as determined by other nodes on the network, or intelligently handled the chain reorganization process. Checkpoints implemented during wallet releases are only temporary protections for chain forks. Bitcoin has been designed to select the chain of blocks with the highest value of proof of work by default. During the last few years, we've seen this fatal flaw exploited through civil attacks known as the double spend 51% attack on almost every altcoin that forked from Bitcoin, and even others using similar consensus mechanisms. The truth is that Bitcoin has never been fully automated. It was designed to be, but nobody has ever fully accomplished this. Security of the network solely depends on no single entity being able to outmine the rest of the network. The flaw is not within proof of work algorithms, as some might think, but in other areas of the code base. A bug within the primitive protocol consensus mechanism, although proven to work, has shown vulnerabilities and needs to be updated as soon as possible, at least in all forked altcoin projects. Removing chain active and IBD would be an initial place to start in attempts to restore the original consensus protocol envisioned by Satoshi himself. Is the Bitcoin source code vulnerable? Quote, Group IB recommends that the best defense for smaller crypto projects wanting to protect themselves against a 51% attack is to use encryption algorithms not typically adopted by large virtual currencies. Bitcoin's static consensus is not under any immediate threat at the moment, nor in the near future. Investment capital required to exploit attack vectors are exponentially greater than the potential rewards that might be acquired. The investment risk is discouraging enough. When the potential for success is very minimal, as 9,000 plus nodes and thousands of users are attempting to mitigate this. Simply using excessive hash rates is not a guarantee for a double spend success at merchants or exchanges. Closely monitored services with redundant backups have in the past shown to be very useful in quickly identifying suspicious behavior on the network. But this process has been mostly performed by humans. Artificial intelligence capabilities within the Bitcoin node software are non-existent or very minimal at best. Altcoins that have poor monitoring and integrity checking by their developers or merchants usually have a far greater success rate for exploitation than Bitcoin merchants when the majority hash rate is prioritized to a fraudulently forked blockchain. Profit Hunter's Coin is a project that I began working on in 2017 with a group of altcoin developers concerned about security. They understood the harsh realities that small projects could never achieve the hash rates Bitcoin has acquired in 10 years, in the short time frame required to maintain their network integrity. 2018 was the year of the double spend attacks. Quote, a bug in Verge was used by hackers in both April and May to cash out more than $1 million worth of cryptocurrency. In June, Zen cryptocurrency lost $550,000 through a 51% attack that lasted only 4 hours. A similar attack happened to Litecoin Cash later that month. However, the biggest attack this year was on Bitcoin Gold, which lost 388,000 BTG, about $18 million, in May after a malicious miner took control of the BTG network. The attack quickly resulted in US-based exchange Bittrex delisting Bitcoin Gold from its exchange due to security issues. Prior to starting up PHC, I was working with BATA in developing the world's first artificially intelligent network firewall for Bitcoin. It was highly effective in mitigating potential attacks or excessive centralized mining. It was not perfect by definition, but it did in fact work. No financial losses were ever incurred from BATA merchants while the Bitcoin firewall was operational. Daily attacks lasting for almost a full year gave me an extra advantage to learn in real time how the exploit was performed and how to make the nodes on the network learn normal network conditions from other nodes and compare that with attacking ones, filtering out abnormal behavior. This was my first attempt to replace the burden of humans trying to identify and mitigate the attack before it was destructive. Countless projects vanished into oblivion, kept operating with an exploited blockchain, or tirelessly attempted to patch the vulnerabilities. Unique concepts were explored by other developers sharing the same goals as mine. One effective countermeasure was multi-algorithm coins that forced new blocks to be created by a different hashing method in sequence. Other solutions opened new attack vectors with a quick fix, such as implementing staking and removing proof of work entirely. Most developers were simply forced to mine their own coin at a loss just to secure the network from unwanted forks, and others simply hoped the problem would just go away. In an ill-fated attempt to prevent future attacks was to use custom algorithms that ASICs would not be able to mine, ignorantly forgetting that those chips can and will be produced if the return on investment is substantial. Unfortunately, this is the point when security of the network goes to null, as seen with the X11 algorithm. What kind of general consensus update does Bitcoin need? Critical updates must be made as soon as possible to remove Craig Wright, N-Chain, Calvin Ayre, Jimmy Nguyen, Adam Back, CEOs of corrupt exchange services, news sites, along with Blockstream's ruthless influence on future development, reversing the chain active and initial block download update. They're obsessed with spreading misinformation, personally attacking core developers by spreading libel and slander daily to justify their deceptions and confuse average users with intellectual property theft. Blockstream's satellites might need updating or could be incompatible with a rollback to Core 8 consensus. That's only negligible, as most users do not access the Bitcoin network in this method anyway. Prioritizing a subnetwork of nodes for connections is very dangerous, as their past core upgrades have shown to computerize the decentralized consensus of Satoshi proposed. Operating without regulations, orbiting in outer space, Blockstream Bitcoin half nodes make it quite convenient to ensure block headers, along with their self-defined quote best chain, are broadcast throughout the chain reorganization, as their uptime is 100%, forcing all other nodes to roll back in accordance to a single peer only. These pseudo-nodes are financially supported by the central banking cartel that has been taking advantage of our global economy since 1913. They should not be trusted under any circumstances to be seen as leaders among an industry that was designed to make their centralized control of political and financial power obsolete. One effective method to mitigate Blockstream Satellite's attack vector on the Bitcoin network would be to aim a directed energy weapon at them in orbit, instantly rendering them non-operational permanently. Actually, there's an easier thing than that. See, they're just renting time off of a fucking satellite. They didn't actually put a satellite in the fucking air. So basically, if you took out the satellite that's supporting their transactions and whatever they're doing, chances are you would be wiping out like Netflix and stuff like that too. So yeah, directed energy weapon is probably not a good idea. Continuing. Dr. Nikola Tesla would be proud to know his technology was used for defensive purposes and for the benefit of humanity. Well, I happen to agree with that. Trademark protection regarding the first Bitcoin, BTC, should not only be followed by exchange services, merchants, and regulators, but the users themselves. Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin or BSV should be forced to remove Bitcoin from their name and to respect the intellectual property rights regarding the source code they both stole from core developers while marketing themselves as legitimate supporters. Their pump and dump scheme for the coin that started the crypto industry today is blatantly obvious and should be further investigated by the proper authorities. Market manipulations on the grandest of scales went unnoticed and will continue to be detrimental to beginners entering the marketplace. At the moment, Bitcoin does not need to change anything. It's still secure. A specific consensus should be reached soon regarding block size limits or micropayment flooding to ensure transaction times are not affected by increased use. Block size increased to 2 MB without changes to SegWit, also preventing dust transactions, would not adversely affect the Bitcoin protocol or open new vulnerabilities. It has lots of improvements that can be done, but an agreement must be reached before any of the changes to the code can be made. What are a few upgrades that could benefit Bitcoin in the long term? Potential updates are currently being independently tested using the PHC source code base, more specifically on the testnet as a proof of concept. New enhancements have been added to the old Bitcoin Core 8 code and have already shown promising success to be implemented into other altcoins and even Bitcoin, if ever required in the future. Turbo Sync and Network Socket Timeout. Network Sync Improvement. Early versions of Bitcoin are notorious for connection issues, slow and unreliable network synchronization between peers. These issues have been fixed. Idle nodes unable to properly communicate are automatically disconnected from the network to ensure available socket connections for active peers only. Speed improvements have been added to the network protocol upon the network connection handshake process between nodes, exchanging a value based upon desired maximum speed for the connection session. Without any adverse effects, this small improvement has shown big results. As much as 5 times the default speed increase could possibly be scaled even higher. Bitcoin Firewall. Artificially intelligent, real-time network protection. Node traffic is individually evaluated through analysis of send and receive data signatures compared with other nodes on the network, taking into consideration of their mutually synchronized dynamic checkpoints. Identification, attack mitigation, and network normalization are fully automated by the internal wallet functions. The basic machine learning processes enables the firewall to identify bandwidth abuse, invalid and forked wallets, along with nodes attempting to make a 51% attack on the network with near 100% accuracy. Let's see where we're at. In the future, in real time, it will also remember past network behavior that can be verified through consensus with ChainBuddy, later making a decision if it's harmful or not. Cooperatively reaching an agreement with other nodes on the network, selecting appropriate actions based upon how it adversely affects the network on a potential for damage scale. Dynamic checkpoints and ChainBuddy, artificially intelligent peer-to-peer consensus. Small protocol changes have been made to initiate an additional connection handshake at a 60-second cycle to mutually exchange each other's best chain hash and block height. Consensus achieved quickly among all peers on the network, with ChainBuddy identifying the best dynamic checkpoint, the most valid chain decided by the network, not block height +1 or an elevated proof of work value. The quickest block time while maintaining network consensus will win and be used to build the longest chain by other nodes. How would that work against selfish mining, I wonder? Chain shield, split and fork protection. Frequent live monitoring of all connected nodes to the wallet by using their blockchain dynamic checkpoints. Real-time monitoring of Satoshi's consensus to protect local wallets from getting stuck on a forked chain. Dynamic block rewards, hyperinflation, and chain fork protection. If any node attempts to cheat the current mining difficulty rates by creating blocks offline, they will be punished by receiving a low block reward value from dynamic block rewards. That block will not be accepted in sequence to the correct chain and their block values. This value can't be altered maliciously. Nodes can't mine a separate chain, reconnect with the network, and slip their fraudulent blocks in between valid ones using a 51% attack or even a 5100+% attack. Block shield, time shift, and excessive retargeting. Check block function has been modified to call upon additional checks after all initial checks have been completed. This prevents accepting blocks with altered timestamps or dramatically increasing the difficulty retargeting because too many blocks are getting accepted before their expected time span. The original algorithm was designed to force a miner to slow down by requiring more work to be performed, but a few glitches compounded the problem to make it easy to monopolize the money supply, making other nodes with less power totally useless, and creating the next block within the next expected block time. Or next expected block time. There we go. ASIC choker and dynamic coin distribution, centralized mining protection. Block shield working in unison with ASIC choker and dynamic coin distribution ensures that CPU mining is never unprofitable, even if ASIC miners attempt to gain control of inflation through centralized mining operations. ASIC choker will force solo miners and pools to, quote, wait their turns, rendering them unprofitable for mining during that time. Don't even try submitting a block. It will be rejected if you attempt to make too many, too quickly. Using a percentage of per node algorithms, or a percentage per node algorithm, new coins distribution are virtually equal for everyone on the network based upon their IP address, without taking in consideration of CPU processing speed, of course. No expensive hardware, no more insane energy bills or million-dollar startups. PCs, tablets, and phones can validate blocks the way Satoshi intended the network to reach consensus. Their mining capabilities would be equal and identical. The present is theirs, the future for which I worked is mine. Dr. Nikola Tesla. Yeah. And you know, there was something in here that I wanted to check back on, because where is it at? And it looks like we got hung up again. No, we didn't. Okay, cool. There was something on here that I wanted to follow up on. And it might be this one. Oh, no, there it is. The Bilderberg Group. Huh? Block button one. This is Bitcoin miner and block size debate. Yeah. Okay. So these are some interesting ideas, but I've got to wonder why they haven't been implemented on a wide scale. So yeah, you know, I mean, if it's that wonderful, why haven't the miners adopted it? Is basically it. And you know, I think the last part is probably the best. You know, that last improvement. And let's go ahead and scroll back down to that, and so I can have a reference point to just look at here. Let's see here. Retargeting. Block Shield working in unison with ASIC Choker and dynamic coin distribution ensures that CPU mining is never unprofitable, even if ASIC miners attempt to gain control of inflation through centralized mining operations. ASIC Choker will force solo miners and pools to, quote, wait their turns, rendering them unprofitable for mining during that time. Don't even try submitting a block. It will be rejected if you attempt to make too many too quickly. Now, I've seen what looks like that exact exploit being taking place on the Bitcoin network, where you'll see, and you've seen probably some block volume charts, and you'll see how there's like really zigzaggy, where it's like two of them will be high and then one will be low, and then another one will be high and then another one will be low. Well, those low blocks, I'm pretty sure that's what they're talking about in this paper, about getting smaller blocks in faster than they should. And I've noticed this happening pretty much every time that I've looked on the Bitcoin blockchain, where they're not hitting 10 minutes. They're hitting like 3 minutes and then going on to the next block. And the same thing is happening on the Bitcoin Cash network as well. And so I got to wonder if this kind of thing, Block Shield, could actually be implemented, and how would you get the existing miners to implement it? I think that's probably the bigger challenge there. Because basically you're telling them that no matter how much money they throw at their operation, they're not going to be able to beat out everybody else consistently and just steal the money. But you got to look at it from another perspective. Okay? If nobody else can get the fucking money, it's not worth anything to them. Yeah, that's right. Part of the incentive for securing the network, part of the incentive of even transacting in Bitcoin, is the possibility of being able to participate in the network, to do so on an ad hoc level. Where it's like, I want to mine today. No, I don't want to mine tomorrow. Just turn the miners off. Not to say that that's actually how you would want to do it, but the option is there. And that you should be able to do so profitably. That you should be able to make a block reward for participating in securing the network. That's the whole incentive for doing it. Later on, of course, that'll be reduced to only transaction fees, but we're talking about a process that is supposed to last decades. And if we're bumping through blocks every 3 or 4 minutes, it's not going to take decades. It's going to take, a decade or so. And then we're going to run out of Bitcoin, and everybody's going to go, what the fuck, man? This is supposed to last 130 years. And what the fuck's that going to do for your reputation, Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. We got some Exodus playing in the background. Just one more comment on that. Altogether, I thought that was a very well-written article. I agree with a lot of the sentiments in it. There's a couple things that I kind of differ with, but not very much. For the most part, I think they're spot on. And I would like to see a couple of those changes made to Bitcoin. Because I've said this multiple times on this show that I really believe that far more of us are supposed to be mining than are currently mining. Or that far more of us should be mining than are currently mining. If you want to make the network more secure, be a miner. If you want to make money off of Bitcoin in a way that doesn't have any intermediaries between you and anybody and the money, be a miner. There's no Coinbase or anything like that between you and the network. Just be a miner. Anyway, like I was saying, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. And as far as our next song goes, let's go with this one. The New Priesthood by Dark Angel, here on Coin Metal. And that was Voivod with I Conspiracy. Man, I'll tell you what, for a band like them, it's very so innovative. If you listen to their music and really understand what they're doing there, it's so fucking wild. Really, I want to start like a GoFundMe petition to get them to play McDonald Theater or McDonald Theater. I think that would be awesome. Get them to play in Eugene at the McDonald Theater. See fucking Voivod. That would be fucking awesome. And Prong. That would be even better, honestly. They did play in Eugene one time, a long time ago, in this little venue called the Wow Hall. And I feel so terribly disappointed because I happened to be in town that night, like bar hopping or something like that. And I really should have been at fucking Prong. If I would have like really known it to be true, I would have like been there. You know, if I had like a little bit of advance notice, perhaps I would have fucking been there because I love Prong. Anyway, I got a couple of little tidbits I scrounged up during the music break, and kind of going along this theme of consensus. And this one is on CoinDesk.com. MakerDAO fee decrease stalls amid decline in token holder voting turnout. This is by Christine Kim, authored May 20th, 2019, 1637 UTC. No penis. After an initial round of polling on Thursday, MakerDAO token holders have failed to finalize a decision to decrease fees for users on DAI stablecoin loans taken out through MakerDAO's programmatic lending protocol. On Friday, a secondary round of polling was launched in order to execute a 2% decrease to MakerDAO fees in the system. However, for the first time, the minimum threshold of 117,631.90 Maker tokens was not reached over the weekend, and the executive vote remains unfulfilled, with a total of 46,546.86 Maker tokens staked. Taking a step back, MakerDAO is the most popular decentralized finance application in the cryptocurrency industry, according to decentralized application tracker DeFi Pulse, which could be a skewed voting system, who knows. MakerDAO has issued over 81 million DAI tokens, backed by the world's second largest cryptocurrency in the world, Ethereum. For the first time in 5 months, MakerDAO tokens agreed to reduce accumulating interest, called the stability fee, on all MakerDAO DAI loans from 19.5% to 17.5%. However, the majority vote threshold itself was actually reached by a total of 2 large token holders who collectively staked 54,000 Maker tokens and outweighed other polling options, which had a higher number of individual voters, but with a lower number of tokens staked overall. Quote, "There are 2 major important signals the community should be monitoring," highlighted head of community developer at MakerDAO Foundation, Richard Brown, in a Reddit post. Quote, "MKR staked, which determines the governance polls and the overall voter turnout. We need to know as a group if 2 large holders push through a vote while a majority of smaller holders voted differently. Being able to have this information is important for the community in order to identify disconnects." Brown added in the same post that there is absolutely no MakerDAO token holder large enough to overpower 5 or 6 MakerDAO token holders staking in favor of a competing proposal. However, as noted by a Reddit user in response, token holders no longer feel safe staking their Maker tokens after a critical vulnerability was disclosed roughly 2 weeks ago that could have frozen user funds. Quote, "Rich, one of the reasons people were panicking is the last voting contract had a bug, and they are not prepared to risk a large chunk of money until they are 100% confident that the new contract is safe," wrote Forex trader Oz. The new contract has half maker than the last one. That's why turnout was smaller than before. Due to the lack of maker tokens staked in favor of a 2% decrease to the stability fee, Brown issued an additional Reddit post Sunday questioning whether the token holders should be given more time to stake their tokens or the executive vote should be abandoned altogether. Quote, because there can be an assumption that the most recent option presented is, quote, better than the last, it's possible to consider the existing system in a state of flux while everyone waits for the votes to come in. What happens, though, if the new state isn't approved? Asked Brown in his post. He wrote, quote, does the polling system have a hard dependency on a recent state change in the system? How do we know whether the lack of support for a new vote represents support for the old state or simply a delay in voter activity? When can we expect a state to be considered chosen? For now, the executive vote to decrease the stability fee is ongoing. In addition, a new governance proposal has been entered into the system, proposing MakerDAO tokens and a new series of proposals ranging from a stability fee of 13.5% to 23.5%. Quote, we don't know if the new executive vote will ever be ratified or if it will be voted in during the poll. So we've reconfigured the polls to stop talking about relative changes, that is, negative 2% or plus 3%, and instead ask about the absolute values for the fee, said Brown to CoinDesk. Oh, that's a stupid idea. I mean, people are... Look, they're trying to reduce the amount of interest on the coins, the tokens rather, that are loaned in I don't know, stability fee of 13.5% to 23.5%. You know, they're trying to account for the market fluctuation in the value of the coin or token rather, and I've said this multiple times on this show that you can't. Eventually, they're probably going to end up getting wrecked, and that's just all there is to it. You know, that I don't know why people think that stability is actually possible when we're utilizing as an intermediary of value or a determining factor in the value of cryptocurrencies, national fiat currencies. We do not have the same cost structure and the same distribution model that they do. So trying to use one to evaluate the value of another, you can only do it on a spot basis. Regardless of when you do it, you can only do it on a spot basis, and it is ever changing because you do not know all of the factors going on the fiat currency side of the equation. You know, for all you know, in the next hour, the Federal Reserve is going to issue $2 billion additional dollars every hour on the hour for the next week to their select banks that they want to distribute the funds to. You don't know. They don't have to disclose that anywhere except for in retrospect when they say, oh yeah, by the way, we lowered the interest rate by 0.5% and did a little bit of quantitative easing. You know, or we're planning to do some quantitative easing. They've already done it. It's already had the market impact, but then they later announce that they're going to do it. And usually the first place that you see it is in oil and gas prices. And this has been monkeyed around a little bit, but to some extent you actually have to have physical above ground reserves to be talking about a price for them. You know, even confirmed reserves are not confirmed in the ground reserves are not enough anymore to convey the level of trust that you would need in order to ascertain a definitive price on it in fiat currencies or any other currency for that matter. But I've talked about this a few times on the show, that really the production cost and the willingness of others to use it as a currency unit or something like that should be the determining factors in the price. So if you're mining Bitcoin or whatever, and the rate of return is such that you can make enough to keep going and put $1 or $2 in your pocket, then that's pretty cool. But again, on the other side of the equation, if they're just pumping out dollars left and right, you can't consistently price it in that. So when you're looking at things to buy, you have to look at like oil and say, okay, how many BTUs of energy were dedicated to this? What's the per gallon amount of effort and maybe even money, how much you invested in it? That would be a consideration, and trying to use that as a means of a metric of valuation between items. So if you're pulling oil out of the ground at, say, 100 gallons an hour, you can use that against the hour on the Bitcoin network on what its performance was during that time, and ascertain an actual exchange rate between the two commodities without the intermediary of $1. You know how much electricity you dedicated to extracting that oil out of the ground. You know how much fuel you burned in extracting that much oil out of the ground. You know how many manpower hours you dedicated to extracting that oil out of the ground. And you know exactly at what rate you paid them. So you have an idea of exactly how much energy you dedicated to extracting the oil out of the ground. If you can compare that to exactly how much energy was dedicated to mining the Bitcoins over that hour period, like I said, you can ascertain a true real-world price between the two items. And again, without the intermediary of the dollar. And you can do this with any cryptocurrency. And of course, your time and effort is probably going to be evaluated differently. And of course, the exchange rate between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and the currency you're being paid in should also be a consideration as well. But you're going to be looking at coins in that kind of context. You're going to be looking at coins and determining by the coins and their characteristics which one you want to be paid in. And if you're skilled enough, you can be looking at that chart and saying, this particular coin is really, really down right now, but from the looks of the chart, it looks like it might be going into an uptrend. So I'm going to get paid in it, and I'm going to hodl it for about a week, and then when I put it on the exchange, I'm going to make a 0.5 cent return or maybe more per hour that I dedicated to work. That's the kind of power that banks have only had. When people downplayed the monetary aspects of cryptocurrencies, they completely delete this from the conversation. And I mean, I don't know why we aren't a little more ardent on trying to catch people at that and hammer it home in their heads that's really the whole point of this stuff. Find the best way to pay one another, And again, I was talking about the differences between gold and Bitcoin to somebody that was following, I think it's Peter Schiff. And this person did not seem to understand that value in and of itself is an entirely subjective estimation. You value Bitcoin differently than I do. It's entirely subjective. And because of that, nobody else could tell you how to value Bitcoin. And you can't tell anybody else how to value Bitcoin. So when I hear Peter say something like, if Bitcoin had no value, what are you talking about? If a miner mined it and it exists, somebody values it. You don't dedicate computing power to things you don't value. Especially not in cryptocurrencies. I'm not trying to mine Ripple. Why? I don't like Ripple. You know? If I were to be mining anything right now, I'd either be mining Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Verge. I'd be mining a currency that is used right now. And that I can look at the market and say, you know, I like this one and I don't like this one. But that selection, that choice, that vote of confidence with my hardware, my internet capacities, and my electricity is my choice. And this is a power that has been denied us through the use of common intermediaries such as the Federal Reserve Note, or the Chinese yuan, or the euro. All of these currency units have fluctuating valuations both behind the scenes and on the markets that you're not necessarily entitled to participate in the decision process of. I mean, now you could, of course, do monetary arbitrage. You can rub the coins together just like the banks do and squeeze out a little bit of arbitrage there. But you actually have to be playing in those markets to participate in that way. And most of us are just victims to what's going on on that side of the market. You know, we just sit idly by and say, oh shit, my dollar is buying 0.7% less than it did yesterday. Oh shit, my dollar is buying 10% less than it did yesterday. Again, it is not the position of anybody to tell you how to value cryptocurrencies. And that is the difference between it and fiat currencies. That is probably the most important one that's coming to finance and digital commerce. Anyway, getting back to it, I got another article here. Venezuela tries to avoid U.S. sanctions by trading in rubles and crypto. And this is on Coindesk.com. This is by John Biggs, authored May 20th, 2019 at 1930 UTC. Yes, penis. Venezuela and Russia are in talks to use the ruble as in mutual trade settlements, thereby abandoning the commonly used U.S. dollar in country-to-country transactions. Further, the two countries are considering using El Petro, Venezuela's oil-pegged cryptocurrency, as another medium of exchange. Venezuela's UN representative Jorge Valero told Russian House organ Russian Today about the upcoming trade plans. The petro is pegged to the value of a barrel of Venezuelan oil, and the national currency, the bolivar, is pegged to the petro. Venezuela hopes to avoid sanctions by disconnecting from the U.S. dollar, and the petro is an integral part of this process. It is also, quote, swapping crude oil for imported projects, according to RT. RT writes, quote, the diplomat stressed that the U.S. penalties against Venezuelan oil sector, along with freezing its dollar accounts, has had an enormous negative impact on the country's economy. The measures deprived the Latin American notion of free access to international financial support and investments in its oil sector. The U.S. Treasury imposed sanctions against the Venezuelan government and its crypto exchange Evrofinance after Petro's launch. The Treasury wrote that Evrofinance's involvement in the Petro demonstrated Maduro's hope that the Petro would allow Venezuela to circumvent U.S. financial sanctions. Given there are no open crypto exchanges and no real way to pay with crypto in Venezuela, even after months of effort, this effort to route around sanctions appears aimed directly at getting Venezuela's catastrophically broken government back on track, but may or may not have much effect on the local economy. Yeah. Venezuela has been a subject that's been very, very close to my heart in with regard to cryptocurrencies. because the Venezuelans themselves, I believe, at least from what I've seen so far, that they've kind of disconnected entirely from their government in some ways. That some that are knowledgeable about cryptocurrencies have taken to using them to buy groceries. As a matter of fact, they went a step further and started getting into mining. And at one point, the Maduro government decided to crack down on them. And what did they do? They didn't stop mining. First, the cops confiscated all their mining gear, took the shit home, set it up at home, and fired it back up again. Next, the Venezuelans that got their shit ganked, what they did was they built a bunch of gaming boxes with 4 fucking video cards in them. And that way when the cops came by again and said, hey, are you mining here? They said, no, man, this is my gaming box. What are you talking about? I'm kicking everybody's ass in PUBG right now. You want to join in? And that was it. And the cops fucked off and, sat by their ASICs while they were cranking out the sats. And to my knowledge, that shit's still continuing to this day. This whole idea that the people that were involved in crypto in Venezuela have started adopting the petro. From what I understand, there's not really there's not very many interfaces for them to interact with the petro, and where you can interact with it is when you get paid in bolivars. You can exchange them for petros and then put the petros in your account. And of course you get like double billed on that. Again, this is even more motivation to just flip Maduro off. Say, look bro, we love you as being our president and talking shit to other world leaders and shit, but your financial policies suck. You don't have any concept of monetary policy, and if you're really fucking smart, you get off of this petro bullshit and let us free. Let us mine for you. Let us mine for Venezuela. We will make the money. We will spend the money here. You will enjoy the economic activity within the borders, and everybody happy. Not only that, but if you're really interested in circumventing the U.S., the best thing to do is transact in Bitcoin, or Ethereum, or Verge, or Litecoin, or XRP, or Bitcoin Cash, or anything that isn't nationally bound. Rather than talking about this bullshit with the petro, you ought to be talking to Russia and say, yo, look, we got all this oil. We're willing to sell you some of it. We're willing to accept Ethereum at a mutually agreed exchange rate for our oil. Now, you want to talk about something that would disrupt that connection that you have to the US dollar. That would be it. All of a sudden, those sanctions don't work anymore. And it's not like they're just going to be able to shut down Ethereum, because of a lot of Ethereum mining isn't even happening within the United States or anywhere that they actually have a jurisdiction to control or interdict in. So again, use Dogecoin. Sell your fucking oil for Dogecoin. And completely circumvent all that embargo and sanction bullshit. One of these days, people are going to fucking understand this shit. It's not going to be me saying it, I don't think. Maybe, hopefully. but one of these guys is going to get it. Fuck Trump. Get it together. Let us free. It's what is it? Sanders or Stevenson or Stevens or something like that. Representative last week when he was talking about how cryptocurrencies are supposed to displace the U.S. dollar's hegemony and all that shit. Yeah, you know what? It is. But if you really think about it, it doesn't just do that to the United States. It does that to everybody. It does that to China, it does that to Russia, it does it to Venezuela, it does it to Puerto Rico, it does it everybody. It does it down to the individual. And puts you on an international kind of game board here. that isn't isolated to one nationality. It isn't isolated to one continent even. You know, I keep reminding you guys because I experienced this myself, but back in like 2013, it might have even been 2012, my friend was over in South Korea teaching people English, and he was there as a teacher. Anyway, so I really wanted to talk to him. It had been a while, and we were talking on Facebook, and he mentioned Skype, and I'm like, you know what? This stupid-ass tablet in my hand is Skype capable. We could conceivably do that. So I downloaded Skype, made a little Skype account. This was before they got bought by Microsoft. And I called him. He was in South Korea. So I was having a video conversation with him in South Korea. If I wanted to send him Bitcoin, all he would have had to do is put up a fucking public address. I could have scanned it, put the amount I want to send to him, and click send. And it'll go to him. It will go in his wallet. And I was aware of Bitcoin. I'd been participating in Bitcoin previous to that. So, you know, I kind of put two and two together, and I realized at that moment that it's all over. This whole, you know, there's going to be a battle between Bitcoin. No, it's all over. It's dead already. It doesn't matter how much they molest fucking Bitcoin through Blockstream or any of that other bullshit. The Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies will only be functioning and existing as long as they are serving the vast majority of users. When they are no longer serving the vast majority of users, when the interest pool is small enough, the fucking value of it will go through the fucking floor. Why? Because there are alternatives that are far more able to serve your interests and your use case than Bitcoin can, or Ethereum, or any one individual cryptocurrency. And because that is true, that is where the interest will go. And the value will go with it. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. And I got some fucking Killing Joke playing in the background. That's some awesome stuff, but I'm feeling the need for some 12-Foot Ninja. So here it is. Kingdom. Here on Coin Metal. And that was Gizmochi with Voice of Sanity. As if there is one of those out there, right? Certainly not here. Anyway, I wanted to dive into one thing from Zero Hedge here, because it seems to be going along with our consensus kind of thing here. Anyway, this one's by Tyler Durden, authored May 20th, 2019 at 1450. No indication of time zone. Bastard. But I'm just going to assume, yes, penis, because it does say authored by Justin Murray via the Mises Institute. As a matter of fact, let me check and see if there are. There we go. This is actually on Mises.org, or Mises, however you want to pronounce that. Anyway, it's originally authored by Justin Murray, and it was originally authored on the 18th of May, 2019. So, pretty current. How central bank interest rate policy is destabilizing banks. Broadly speaking, banks operate under the concept of maturity transformation. Banks take short-term, less than 1 year, financing vehicles such as customer deposits and use that to finance long-term, more than 1 year, returns. These returns range from the most commonly understood loans, such as auto loans and mortgages, to investments in equity bonds and public debt. Banks make money on the interest spread between when they pay the owners of the money and what's earned from the operations. Banks also make money on other services such as wealth management and account fees, though these are relatively small compared to the maturity transformation business. In terms of assets, the primary asset a bank holds is the demand deposit, also referred to as the core deposit. These are your everyday savings and checking accounts. Banks also sell wholesale deposits such as CDs, have shareholder equity, and can also take out debt such as interbank lending. As these assets are owed by someone else, or owned by someone else, each of them demands a return for the use of those assets. These are part of the costs of operations for a bank. There are also more fixed operating costs such as employees, buildings, and equipment that must also be financed. So, a bank will take assets and formulate loans on them. Like most of the world, the U.S. operates on a fractional reserve system, one where banks originate loans in excess of the deposits on hand. Take a look at the balance sheet of a large regional bank, 5/3 Bank, for example. For the 2018 fiscal year, 5/3 reported non-capital assets of $94 billion and a deposit base of $108 billion. However, the cash and cash equivalent component of these assets stood at $4.4 billion, or just 4% of demand deposits. It is critical then that the bank convinces those depositors to keep their deposits with 5/3 and not request a withdrawal. Doing so would collapse the bank, as it's unable to quickly make good on any withdrawal request greater than 4% of the deposit base. To do this, the bank pays the depositor interest on the deposit. How the collapse happens. This is where interest stability becomes a problem. When the Federal Reserve manipulates interest rates, banks are able to project fairly steady expenses for operations. While a business likes it when operational costs are relatively constant, this creates major problems for the banking system. When interest rates are supposed to be near 0% for, say, a decade, the banking system builds up an income portfolio that is anchored to that near 0% cost of money. Back to the 5/3 balance sheet, we notice that the bank's returns were $5.1 billion, or around a 5% average return on assets. $4 billion of those returns are tied up in $94 billion in long-term lending. Interest expenses came in at around $1 billion, or a little over 1%. The company also has $3.9 billion in relatively fixed operating expenses. Basically, 5/3 Bank is operating on fairly thin profit margins relative to the bank's asset base, which makes the bank highly vulnerable to any interest rate fluctuations. It also makes the bank this is my addition. It also makes the bank subject to the possibility of a lot of money laundering and other illicit activity that banks tend to engage in when they need to provide some liquidity to the market. Continuing on, let's say the Federal Reserve then begins to step up the target interest rate. As the Fed reduces competition on the market and sells assets, interest rates rise as these new assets begin to compete with existing assets. 5/3 then runs into a problem. If the risk-free rate starts to rise, depositors will look at that paltry deposit return and begin to wonder why they're keeping their money in the bank when other low-risk vehicles are now offering higher returns. Since 5/3 can't afford to lose much cash, the bank will be prompted to start raising deposit rates since they want to keep money in the bank. They will also have to refinance short-term revolving debt at a higher rate. The quandary to the bank is that nearly their entire revenue stream is made up of fixed return vehicles. The effective spread between total costs and total revenue is just 0.2% of assets. This means that if financing costs increase by more than 20 basis points, 5/3 Bank begins to take a loss. Since the bank had made loans for over a decade with these extremely low rates in mind, it will take some time to rebuild a portfolio of higher interest rate loans and investments to counterbalance this loss, or the bank will seek to engage in high-risk investments like drug dealing. For a normal company, this isn't a big deal. Companies can withstand losses for periods of time because they tend to build up a cash base to get through weak periods as they retool their operations. A bank, though, lacks this flexibility, as they have to retain cash ratios to facilitate depositor withdrawals. A mere 1% increase in total borrowing costs to 5/3 will see the bank run out of cash in just 4 years. But since the bank has to maintain ratios, this will prompt the bank to begin selling assets to take on additional loans. The problem compounds twofold from this point for 5/3. First, the primary assets are income generating, so for every asset sold to keep cash ratios afloat just exacerbates the cash bleed, and any new debt has interest expenses that need servicing without a corresponding asset return. Second, the assets have rates below market rate, so have to be sold at a discount, i.e. at a loss. Compounding further, every bank is operating like this. Every bank is operating on thin margins that assume a perpetual near zero rate regime. If one bank has to unload assets to keep cash ratios intact, all the banks are inevitably doing the same. The largest portfolio item is usually the one that attempts liquidation. In 2007, that was home mortgage. This sell-off is self-reinforcing and creates a collapse, since there aren't many entities out there with free cash available to absorb this mass sell-off. Hence why the second largest asset class sitting in the Federal Reserve today is pre-2008 non-performing mortgage-backed securities. The MBS holders, banks themselves, were stuck holding the bag. Banks ran to the last entity with cash available, the one that prints it for a bailout. Central banks will inevitably respond by trying to stabilize rates again, generally suppressing rates below the last cycle's floor. Central banks then perpetually ratchet the rates down until they run into that 0% barrier, then begin to engage in radical monetary policy when that lever is no longer available to pull. Canada's pattern since 1980 is a perfect example of this, with an ever downtrending sloping roller coaster. How to avoid this? If banks didn't operate in a world of constant interest rates, an increase in rates wouldn't be an especially large problem. First, if rates are fluctuating, banks naturally hedge against changes in interest rates. When they originate rates at a higher level and rates decline, they will enjoy a higher average return to build a buffer for when rates rise again. Second, if rates engage in natural fluctuation, banks would be hesitant to finance long-term loans using short-term vehicles. Fractional reserve banking partially operates on the expectation that interest rates will remain stable for the long run. If the cost of money next month could be 20 basis points higher than it is this month, banks will have incentives to seek fixed financing solutions as opposed to leveraging depositor money. In other words, banks would likely cease engaging in maturity transformation, since the risk of interest rates exceeding the return on the entire portfolio is just too high. That, or at least limit exposure to this form of lending to something less than a gaudy 27-to-1 leverage ratio, and promote sales of fixed financing like CDs. Market uncertainty and the removal of central banking backstop would create a more stable banking system, which means naturally moving towards a full reserve system. Yeah, in order to do that, you actually have to have a non-debt vehicle as your monetary unit. Yeah. Let's check into some of the comments here. And Dwayne Dibley says, in terms of assets, the primary asset, or this is a quote actually, in terms of assets, the primary asset a bank holds is the demand deposit, also referred to as the core deposit. These are your everyday savings and checking accounts. Dwayne chimes in, deposit accounts are not assets of the banks. They are liabilities. Bank debt obligations. What can be asserted as assets of the bank is the money assumed to have been deposited by the account holder or to the benefit of the account holder. As banks are known to create deposit accounts and then add to deposit accounts without the benefit of the corresponding amounts of money, and all available data demonstrates this fact, there is no legitimate or theoretical means by which anyone can construe deposit accounts as being, quote, assets of the banks. 97% of all deposit accounts are naked accounts. There is no money that can be associated with their existence. The vast majority of loans created by banks are variable interest rate loans, which means that banks are not prone to suffer if interbank rates go up unless the ensuing rise in consumer rates cause debtor defaults. Yeah, I can understand that one. Max B&B says, in response, when you deposit $100 in the bank balance sheets say asset 100, liabilities 100. Problems start when the bank can loan your 100 to me, but at the same time promise that you can have it as well. Yeah, there you go. Let's see if there's any other ones in here. Heretic Jones says, there was a Far Side cartoon in the 80s or 90s in which a cow has a disturbing realization that he has been eating grass all along. The farmer can control the availability of grass in space and time. He can maintain an abundance of grass with no scarcity. If a bank issued fiat currency and the bank's little whipping boy, the state, are analogous to the grass and the farmer, I hate to think what that makes people. Yeah, bank poo-poo. Let's see here. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to go through all of the responses here, just to say that this seems like a very astute observation. And the problem with it is that the banks are the valuating arbiter, and they don't necessarily act at the behest or benefit of the customers or the market at large. Sometimes they're operating exclusively in their own best interests. And usually when they're evaluating things, that's their first concern in mind is, are we going to make a profit? Because if we're not, then we're probably not going to want to do this. And, that again is the problem. That without the voice of the market being directly heard, with an intermediary in between that gets to reevaluate the things being said and the terms being asked for, and just reconstrue them on their own for their own benefit, you end up with vast disparities in the market. And we see that everywhere that we look these days. That there are places where money should be spent that it isn't being spent, and things that are really gaudy and overspent on are popping up all over the place. And we can complain a little bit about that in crypto, but it's a reflection of the greater market at large. That the money needs to go somewhere where it can create some sort of productivity. And that includes just a little bit of money made on the exchange rate between cryptos and fiat and so on and so forth. But it's got to be some production of capital over what currently exists. Otherwise it's just a hole in your asset sheet that's bleeding out, like is suggested in this article. And I think that's one of the more important aspects of cryptocurrencies is that you create the value, and so you have a say in exactly how you value it. You know, I mean, when I say it, I'm talking about the monetary unit in concern. So, you know, if you're mining Dogecoin, and when you sell your Dogecoin into the market that you've mined, you're determining the market price that you're willing to accept for it. And nobody can actually impose that on you. They can ask for more, they can ask for less, but that's their decision. You know, but I've often said that at the point that I do get into mining again, I'll be doing market sells. I'm not going to be doing any retail on it. You know, I'll be putting up a market price on there. And I mean, not a market price, a limit order on the sell side, and be like, you'll take it at the fucking price that I put up here, because that's the price that I can make money at. and if you're not willing to pay it, then it's just going to sit there in the order book until you are. Now, I think if people were a little more cutthroat like that we'd see a lot more resolution in the market that we don't see right now. You know, I think there would be a lot less tolerance for intermediaries such as like Tether and stuff like that. You know, people will be looking at it and seeing that there's a disparity that's continuing to exist there, and it's not exactly helping you out any. So, anyway. But yeah, we're winding down to the end of the episode here. We will be back on Wednesday. I haven't actually planned anything else out. I certainly don't when I have this on my schedule. Mm-hmm. But yeah, 8 to 11 Pacific Standard Time. And usually I'm in the Discord and Telegram for Verge Currency. So if you ever want to chat or whatever, usually I'm there on Twitter and Facebook. So hit me up, man. I'm here. But yeah, as far as our last dance is concerned, as usual, I never pick one until it's like time to do it, you know? So I'm still up in the air as far as what to go with. I think some Tool would probably be good at this time, because I think a lot of people are kind of toolish out there. Yeah, I'm not going to give away any Game of Thrones spoilers, only to say that I thought they really condensed a lot of shit that they shouldn't have, and really expanded a lot of shit that they shouldn't have, and dragged a lot of shit out that they shouldn't have. But altogether, I think it was an appropriate ending. Certainly much more bloodless than the one certain entities, or a certain entity, had in mind. But you know, you kind of saw it coming. You know, if you followed the story arc long enough, you kind of saw it coming. It was kind of inevitable. It's kind of the best resolution to the problem, I think. Anyway, with that, I would like to close out this episode. Thank you very, very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. As I said, we will be back again on Wednesday. And so until then, I want you all to trade safe. Do your homework. And watch out for your own bunghole, because nobody else is going to do it for you. Thanks again for listening, and you all have an excellent evening. Our last dance for tonight, Tool, Vicarious, here on Coin Metal. Thanks again. Good night.